me?
I think partly the way I look at it is we have awakenings in life, and the first awakenings are obviously the infant awakens to the sensoria, and then you have emotional awakenings, certainly the first pangs of experiencing emotional attachment. And I think there is an intellectual awakening that just is deferred in a lot of people. And I think there's also a spiritual awakening that is related to me to the intellectual, because I really feel, I'm very much in agreement with the scholastics that intellect is a spiritual mode of, that it really is a spiritual phenomenon.
But what is meant by spiritual here?
Well, that it's immaterial, that it's not of the material world.
Is the intellect always spiritual?
I think certainly if you believe in the agent intellect, this idea that we're actually participating.
Well, if you believe in the intellect as a godhead, then it's going to be spiritual.
I think the brain seems to me to be a type of hardware, but it doesn't explain where the software comes from. It doesn't explain how we're having thoughts, and the fact that thoughts might have some kind of neural activity, but I don't see it in the same way as you have the cloud, and then you have your computer in front of you, and you pull these things down from the cloud. But where is the cloud?
Yeah, it doesn't explain emergence, which is the term that people use to get over the question. They say that the intellect emerges from the brain, or the spirit emerges from these 2 pounds or pound and a half of wet flesh. Well, that doesn't explain anything. It's a term. So that seems to be, for a while, I engaged for a while in what turned out to be sort of fruitless stuff of reading a lot about neurophysiology, and there's no answer to these questions. And no, I've never read an article by a neuroscientist that said, we may never know. They always say, we aren't there yet.
Right. Well, I think scientists,
they have to, yeah.
They have their own faith. And I think theologians say we're going to find out in the afterlife. Scientists say we're going to find out in the future. So it's, priests share a lot of things in common, and I think that's one of them. I'm still thinking about inter-esse. It's such an interesting idea because it seems to me that a lot of what spiritual work is about getting to the essence, getting to our own essence. One of the things that, to me, acedia in some ways is a loss of self through obsession with the self. And I know you're not as much a fan of Kierkegaard as I am, but one of the things that Kierkegaard said, which really impressed me, was he said that one of the most dangerous things in the world is to lose yourself. And he said that people can lose their wife or their spouse, they can lose an arm, they can even lose $5 and they'll notice it. But they can lose themselves without even noticing it. And I think acedia seems to me to be, it's related to that, in a sense that people really lose themselves in this kind of meaninglessness. And that's why one of the daughters of acedia is despair.
Which comes first?
I think the lack of concern comes first, and then despair sets in. If you look at somebody like Macbeth, Macbeth was not doing any spiritual work. In fact, he was listening to the demons. The Weird Sisters were definitely some kind of demonic, and his ambition, worldly ambition, took him over, and then he ends up in a state of utter tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. He's in that this is just a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And I think that's where they end up. Whereas if you look at a character like Duke Signor, in As You Like It, he ends up like his losing his position becomes an opportunity for spiritual pursuit. And so he's in the forest saying that I hear tongues in trees and books in running brooks and sermons in stones and good in everything. These are very different responses to the world. One is seeking the worldly things and ends up in utter despair. And the other is loses all the worldly things and ends up in a spiritual state.
Yeah. Look, I haven't, can I change a little bit?
Absolutely.
It really goes back to what we were talking about before, the nature of the intellect. Is the intellect always guiltless in the sort of loss of faith and the kind of dismal lack of hope that we were, despair that we were talking about? Or a better way to put it is, are there modes of the intellect that invite that kind of thing, namely the mode called rationality? That is, should I say what I mean by rationality?
Absolutely.
Rationality is what we usually call linear thinking, going
Right.
from here to there in articulable steps, proving, showing the dogmas you begin with, ending up with a conclusion, showing what the inferences are in between. Whereas the intellect is not so method-bound. And it seems to me that rational method or rationality has an aspect to it which is really dangerous. People who are devoted to it lose or forget their humanity. They make a kind of God out of reason. And that seems to me can lead to real disasters.
The reign of terror.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
reason was everything. They made it a god.
Reigns of terror often depend on being on rationality.
The Germans had all their rationality. It was all reasoned out in their minds. And Stalin, Mao.
The systems, the people that run themselves by systems.
This gets to something really interesting of the virtue of sloth, because part of the problem with these busy people is I think the people who have caused the most problems on this planet are people that actually want to change it.
Change what?
The world.
Oh, change the world, yeah.
Yeah, because it's so horrible. And this is all, and they end up killing millions of people in pursuit of this. You know, I had a conversation the other day with somebody, and they were talking about just how it's all this evil capitalism, and that before capitalism, everybody was living in harmony. It was kind of this Rousseauian view of the world. And I was trying to convince him just that there is a human nature, and it seems to me it's pretty consistent. Even in Aboriginal peoples, you're going to find greed and...
The notion of the general will is as close to a kind of fascism.
I could totally agree with you.
Watson and Dorothy Sayers and Evelyn Waugh wrote on the 7 sins. Are there people who are experts on sin?
I think Dorothy Sayers was. I think they both were. Yeah. I think Evelyn Waugh, there's a very interesting story that his son wrote about. I think maybe after his father died. But, you know, he was a corpulent man, Evelyn was, you know.
I always imagined him as skinny.
No, he was quite corpulent. And he had a large family. He was Catholic, had a large family. And apparently, during the war, there were no bananas. And so the socialist government, when it got into power, they issued, for the number of children you had, they would give 1 banana to each child. And so the bananas came, and the son, I think his name was Auberon Waugh, who was a writer also, but